Hola, bienvenidas, bienvenidos. I'm Cristina Vázquez, curator and producer of performing arts in contenidos artísticos, a cultural undertaking that I founded 12 years ago and have been directing since then. Today, we are launching Escena Cross-Border, a webcast with the purpose of making visible women, and other unrepresented voices who work in the performing arts in both sides of the border of Mexico and the United States. We are pleased to have Aisha Ahmad-Post as the first guest of this series of talk. Bienvenida, querida. Gracias por estar aquí.
Thank you for having me.
Aisha is the executive director of the Newman Center for the Performing Arts at the University of Denver. She's a classically trained pianist on double basis with great experience as a performing art curator and artistic director. She has expertise in classical music, jazz, and dance. She has been involved in cultural diplomacy and she loves to travel. And she's also a very generous friend. Gracias again.
Gracias.
Okay, let's start the talk. Please tell me, how do you plan the creation of the Performing Arts Center, the Newman Center, at the University of Denver? We know this kind of work requires different efforts, and it's a puzzle. You have to be aware of your audience, the artists, the tech stuff, the board, the donors. So how is the process for you?
Yeah, thank you for asking. So it is a puzzle. It is a little bit art, a little bit science. I live in Denver, Colorado, which is, sort of central in the United States. It's sort of the gateway to the West. So it means that, folks don't immediately come to Denver. They usually go to New York City or Los Angeles. And so one of the big questions is who's actually touring and who's going to be coming through on a national tour. And then the next piece is the actual curation, right? So the Newman Center is best known for its dance series. We are really the major dance presenter in Denver. And so that's been a wonderful joy because we have a very excited and engaged dance audience. And so we do try to bring as much new work as we possibly can. We also have a pretty big jazz series. So those are our two anchors. One thing that I don't present is a lot of classical music because we have the Denver Friends of Chamber Music, which is a wonderful series. They bring top-notch artists from all over the world. And then, of course, there's the Colorado Symphony, there's the opera, there's a lot of different orchestras too in town. So as well as the Lamont School of Music, which is based at the Newman Center, and that is a classical music conservatory. So when I look at the whole landscape, it's like we have enough classical music. It's very represented. So I focus on the jazz and dance series, but then I also bring in this world music piece because I think it's really important to build international connections for the people in Denver, which is increasingly international. It has a large new immigrant population from Central America in particular. And it's really important that we find ways to build connections with people from different countries, especially at this particular time in US history. So those are the main things that I'm thinking about when I'm curating. And then from there, I, try to be opportunistic about people coming from the left coast to the East Coast, and thinking about all of that. And then, of course, it's the question about budget, right? So when you think about the technical piece, the amount of labor that we need to bring in, the artistry, can we afford it? My goal is usually to break even on my presenting series and then to fundraise for the rest of it. So There's a lot of moving parts. It's different every year. It's always really exciting because there's so much new work being made and really wonderful artists that we want to present and then bring back and build relationships with. So it's really fun.
Yeah, and I know your place. I mean, the Newman Center is a beautiful, beautiful theater, and the community is a very close community. I have the opportunity to stay there for some days, and during the time that the Paul Taylor Dance Company were presenting there, and this is a very impressive place, but also the program and the people reaction is the audience is very participative, I think. So congratulations for that work. So let's go about the population that you just said. So far, what has been your connection with Mexican performing arts?
So I grew up in Tucson, Arizona, which is not exactly on the border, but it's an hour north, roughly, of the Mexican border. So there was a lot of Mexican culture in Tucson. There's, a good half the population, I think, is from Mexico or can trace their ancestry back to Mexico. So there was a lot of awareness of traditional Mexican culture, I would say. We didn't have as much of the pop culture or, other than Selena, but other than that, it was really, but there were mariachi groups at school, there were folklorico groups at school. So that was always sort of baked into the culture of the city that I lived in. And then since I moved to Colorado, where there is a significant, again, Mexican population, it felt essential to really sort of dive into that a little bit. So when I was in Colorado Springs at the Ent Center for the Arts, I brought the Ballet Folklorico de Amalia Hernandez, and it sold out immediately. And it was a really special moment because you could feel this excitement from the audience to just have their culture on stage. And then I moved to Denver during the pandemic. And to be honest, I hadn't actually been to Mexico in a really long time. It had been probably 12 years, 14 years, something like that. And then had the opportunity to come to the Cervantino in 2022. I can't believe that's already a year and a half ago. With Cristina and with the Paul Taylor Company to see this piece that was created for local pre-professional dancers, a full-length work by an alum of the Paul Taylor Company. And that sort of opened up a lot of opportunities because in Denver, of course, we also have, the Mexican Cultural Center, the Latino Cultural Arts Center, we have Folklorico, we have Mariachi, we have a number of different organizations that are fairly well established that are working in Mexican culture. And as we've discussed, Cristina, there's not a lot of touring Mexican artists coming to the United States, or if they are, they're not at the, maybe the size or caliber or have the marketing to be able to fill a venue like the Newman Center at 1,000 seats. So it's a little complicated. So I've been really excited to be working with Contenidos Artísticos to come, and see some of these projects and to build out this idea of a binational dance project, and to bear witness to that in Guadalajara, in Aguascalientes. And then, of course, a grand adventure that we had last year, helping to curate the U.S. delegation as the country of honor to the Cervantino.
Exactly. Yeah, and it's also to understand the systems. Every country, each country, the USA has a different system when we are talking about programming, right? Touring that Mexico has. And it's also the funds, where the funds come from. In the USA, it's mostly private funds or, ticketing, etc. In Mexico, is mostly government funds. So just connect that dots is kind of complicated in the
Yes.
first place. And I really appreciate that people like Aisha and other colleagues um, are taking the time to learn and understand a little more about how the system work, the ecosystem work with the cultural institutions like Instituto Estatal de la Cultura in Guanajuato or Jalisco or in Mexico City, like the Festival Cervantino you just said. So let's talk about Cervantino because that was a very nice adventure that I had the opportunity to share with Aisha. Tell us about your experience when, as a curator, you brought 18 artistic companies to Mexico, almost 300 artists for the first time as part of the performing arts program for the 51 Cervantino Festival, where the United States was the guest of honor.
Yeah.
Oh,
That was a complex, I mean, the Newman Center has nothing on that. That was a really complex thing. Because you have the curators for Cervantino, and they have a very specific idea of what they want. Understandably, it's their festival. And we were working with the US Department of State. And this was really interesting, even from the get go, because our national arts organization, the National Endowment for the Arts, only has jurisdiction within the United States. So if there's artistic experiences outside the United States, it falls to the US Department of State and the Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs. And so the finances are very interesting. And originally, I think that the Department of State wasn't fully prepared for how big the expectations were for Cervantino. I don't think they fully realized what was going to be involved in this, right? So one of the big questions immediately came down to how much money do we have and what can we provide for that? And I think setting those expectations about what we could reasonably afford within the amount of money that had been allocated to us was really important. And it quickly became clear that the amount of money that had been allocated was not sufficient for the ambitions of the embassy in Mexico. So over time, we were able to work with the ambassador and his team, and then the Washington D.C. Mothership, right, to get more funding for this project. And again, it came down to this question of what do you want to represent and what do you want to say about the United States? So the Department of State was really focused on questions of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and also focused on the fact that it was the 200th anniversary of diplomatic relations between the US and Mexico. So it felt important to have something that spoke to that diplomatic relation and the real intertwined history and cultures of the US and Mexico. But we also felt really strongly that we needed to showcase a breadth and diversity of the United States. So we had a very long list of all sorts of different musicians, dancers, theater artists that we wanted to bring. And I should mention that we were focused on the performing arts piece and not the literary or the sports pieces, which were also present in the U.S. presentation in Guanajuato. So it came down, the other piece of this is that, Mexico and Cervantino book a lot later than presenters in the United States. So when this came our way in March or April of 2023, most of the 23-24 season had already been booked. So all these artists already had concerts all around the country, all around the world. And so a big factor was also who was available in October to go to Guanajuato. So that all had to be sort of figured out. And I think what we ended up with was a really excellent selection of artists that were mostly on the emerging side. That there were certainly some venerated artists like Arturo Ferril and Vijay Iyer and Ballet Sonico, right? And we also had folks like the Efra Asheri dance, Concrete Temple Theater, where they're maybe not as well known, but they have a lot to say. And so that was really special. And it was great to see too how the Mexican audiences sort of reacted to certain things. Like I wasn't prepared when we brought a gospel choir, Trey McLaughlin and the Sounds of Zamar. And obviously, Mexico is a very Christian country, very Catholic country. And so actually that gospel music really landed really well. Like people really resonated with what they were doing. So that felt really special. And I, in a way, I sort of wish I could do it again just to take the lessons learned and then to really, build it. But on second thought, maybe I won't. That was a lot of work. But
A
it was
lot of
such an
work.
honor to be able to work on that.
Yeah, and something like for me was a great experience. It was to have the opportunity to put together this artists, American artists, working with local artists from Guanajuato. The case that you just say about the gospel group, and they really did a great job. But also the experience for the local artists and vice versa is really something like in Contenidos Artistas we are looking for, just to connect the artists, that the artists work together and probably bring more experience and work together for the future moments or the future projects. It would seem like even with the Broadway production, it was a local orchestra. So I mean, this kind of experience that we are trying to view, but also is part of the history of both countries. This exchange, probably not in the performing arts, but in other fields, we have a permanently exchange. So yeah, Cervantino was a very great experience because also the city is a very peculiar city. I mean, it's a very different city. It's a colonial city, beautiful city, but it's not easy, to operate there,
Well,
right?
it's the geography, right? I mean, it's in this valley, it's a mining town, so there's all the tunnels. It's not, even though geographically it's not a very big city, it can be difficult to get around. If you're going up to the Auditorio del Estado, right, it can take you 20 minutes, even though it's really not that far, you know? Uh, and so I think the logistics of that too, I remember with Access Dance Company, which, had two or three dancers who use wheelchairs. And the question of, can they leave the Teatro Principal and actually go and get lunch? Can they go outside? Are the sidewalks sufficiently accessible for them to even go get lunch? And, so questions like that were really interesting. And yeah, that
Yeah,
was, that was a lot.
exactly. So, and then we have a 1 million question: how to develop Mexican content or Latin American content on a permanent and daily basis to reach different audiences, considering the existing differences between the USA and Mexico and other countries in Latin America in the programming as a presentation of performing arts. Because we know the system is different in very different ways, right? The working visa, the timeline,
Yeah.
uh, this country is huge. In order to have
Both countries are
both
huge.
countries, but both countries. But I mean, the USA is really huge, and then if you are planning a tour, you can know, with 18 dancers, no, from New York to
Yeah.
California, it's gonna be expensive. So how can we, as a professional in the field,
Mhm.
develop more opportunity or more ways to work together?
So I have a few thoughts on this. I think the first piece is somewhat practical, which is to start with smaller companies, right? To start with, maybe instead of all 18 dancers from the or 24 dances, whatever it is from the Ballet de Jalisco, maybe we only have 8 or 10 dancers and we do a smaller repertory program. Because there's a few different things. One is yes, the US operates on a much longer timeline. So right now it's February of 2024, and I have programmed most of my season through May of 2025. So if I was approached about a Mexican artist right now, it would be very difficult for me to consider them before fall of 2025, right? A full 18 months from now. So I think if the goal is really for Mexican artists to tour to the United States, we need to build that sort of timeline into the calendar. So I'm just mentioning the Ballet de Jalisco because we went to go see them. So let's say they wanted to come, and it would require us to really have those conversations. First of all, to bring the US delegates to see the ballet in Guadalajara, which I don't think you'll have a whole lot of issues trying to convince people to go to Guadalajara. It's beautiful. But to build those relationships, to have the Ballet de Jalisco representatives come to the US, to have presenters come to Guadalajara, and to build those relationships and the excitement around the project. And then to build it into the Ballet de Jalisco's schedule that, okay, we're going in October of 2025. And then from there, I think we can start to have the conversation with presenters to say, this is the period where they're touring, and to really think through the budget. I mean, and I think it's essential too that a dance agent who has those connections, who has the reputation, and a history, like a good track record, right, is representing the company and advocating. Because I think where some of my colleagues, rightly or wrongly, get a little nervous is taking a chance on a company that maybe hasn't ever been to the US, so they don't have the history with the audience, they don't have the name recognition, all those sorts of things. So, for example, I'm working with the Taiwanese Ministry of Culture right now to bring a smaller dance company from Taiwan with a newer choreographer. I saw this work in Taipei with some colleagues, and we all loved it. But the reason that tour is going to happen is not because of the Ministry of Culture. It's because me and my 2 other colleagues who saw the work can advocate with our colleagues in the United States and say, this was incredible and we have to bring them. And in that case, it's all about having those people who can advocate and vouch for the quality of the work to bring that together. And so I think what would be essential is to really think about where are there really strong communities of Mexican audiences and artists, and start there. So, maybe the Ballet de Jalisco starts with the Southwest tour, right? Maybe we start with Los Angeles and Denver and Phoenix and, and Albuquerque or Santa Fe, and that's the tour. And then we slowly build out as there's a track record of success. You have, quotes from presenters and audience surveys and all those things that help to kind of build, but it takes a lot of time. And so I think that's why you see, Amalia Hernandez's company coming all the time, because they have that track record. The Mariachi Herencia de Mexico, right? For better or worse, they're here all the time, right? And they brought Aida Cuevas, and so people, kind of latch onto that. But there's so much more, right? It's and so I think that's where we have to kind of really think through. And I think there's the other piece is really trying to find strong funding from national funders, and to make the case that this is essential, not just for the artists in Mexico, but for the artists in the United States, who then can build that exchange that we were talking about earlier, because that's where the funding is going right now.
Exactly. And it's something like we in Contenidos Artísticos, we have been working for the past 7 years.
Did you just have your birthday?
Yeah, 12 years. So yeah, we are celebrating our 12th anniversary as well. But the thing is, gracias, querida. The thing is, yeah, how can we start from there for a small kind of exchange, like Francisco Graciano from the university in Texas, who is a former Paul Taylor dancer, um, came to Mexico. He worked in a workshop with different dancers in Aguascalientes, and then Daniela Urias is coming to work with the Ballet Hispánico in the Instituto Coreográfico, and then we can just continue these relationships, trying to build probably a co-production or not, or probably just bringing a company and that can do two cities. Forget about that touring for the whole country,
Mhm.
just two cities and just start the relationship from there. Um, and of course, I think the very, very important piece is an agent that specifically in the dance and theater side in Mexico, we don't have it. And this is the big difference. And I think the
Yeah.
big gap that we need to figure out how can just put together. I have had this conversation with Lisa Conlon. She's in the Napama board, and she was telling me, hey, we want to collaborate to bring some presenters and agents to WA
Mm.
for the San Diego and Tijuana conference this coming September.
August, yeah,
Uh,
late August. Mhm.
yeah. So the thing is, that piece is also really important.
Yeah.
So I think we have a lot of work to do.
Yes, we do.
Uh, and with this, I want to ask you one more thing about the Artistico, this dance group that is based in Denver. And one of the director, he used to be a dancer
Both
with
of
Amalia
them.
Hernandez. Both of them, sorry,
Yeah.
both of them. So, and they
Actually, we
have
met.
done really a great job on with his their school and shows and etc. But I know the Newman Center support them in different ways. You wanna talk a little bit
Yeah.
about it?
So when I started in 2020, one of the things I was thinking about was, because we couldn't do shows at all. So how can I use the resources I have to start to invest in our local community? Because even if I don't have shows coming, but I have the University of Denver protecting us financially. But a lot of these companies had nothing of the sort. And so Jose Rosales, the executive director, approached me and said, we'd really love to do our posada at the Newman Center. And, originally he was thinking about one thing. It sort of eventually the work became Fiestas Navideñas. Um, and we made a deal. Unlike our other rental companies, we decided we would invest some money, right? So we made it very accessible for them to use the facility. And we said, your success is our success. So if you have a lot more people come, we'll take a little bit of money on the back end, right? But at least you can get in and you can have this opportunity to build something here at the Newman Center. First year sells out and
Wow.
971 seats. And we had a student matinee also sold out. So that was exciting. And it was already right there. 1,900 people came to see this show. And then this year, they changed it a little bit. They had 2 nights and they were 80-90% sold, and then we did 2 student matinees. And those were sold out. So, and I had people coming up to me at the end saying, I can't believe that I'm seeing this on this stage in Denver. I feel so seen. I feel so excited because this reminds me of, my childhood, and my abuela would play these songs, or, we would go to see the, folklorico company, whatever it was. And so it resonated so strongly with this, with the people who came to see it, and the word of mouth got out, right? And so now we're getting to a point where they're really an essential part of what we do in December. And it didn't take a ton of time, but it just took some trust, a little bit of investment, because Jose and Alfonso are amazing dancers. I mean, obviously they were in Hernandez company. And, it's one thing to be a dancer. It's another thing to build your own show and to rehearse the dancers and to build the choreography and the sets and the costumes and that's a huge undertaking. And so it took a little bit of faith from us to say, you know what, this is important for the city of Denver. And even if it's not the most polished thing, it's essential, right? And this is part of our culture too. And so we need to invest in that. And so it's been really lovely to work with them. I actually just saw them last night. I find myself in a lot of Mexican cultural circles in Denver. And so there was a new exhibit at the Museo de las Americas that opened last night. And so then they were there. And it's just so wonderful to see, the sense of real community that exists in the Mexican cultural space here in Denver. And I'm really honored to be included in those conversations.
Yeah, and you have done an amazing job engaging this community, trying to build more community and be part of that community.
And work on my
Yeah,
Spanish.
you have an amazing Spanish.
No, I don't. But you're very nice.
So thank you, Aisha, for being here for support us in contenidos artísticos. You want to add something else?
I want to thank you for building trust in Denver and in the Newman Center and me, and for giving me and the Newman Center the opportunity to learn so much more about Mexican culture and the ways that we can maybe think more broadly and excitedly about relations between the U.S. and Mexico through the arts. So thank you for your visionary leadership.
Oh, thank you, Aisha. Thank you, everybody. This is the Escena Cross-Border, a series of talks with people, with colleagues they are working to building this exchange between Mexico and the USA from their own side, from their own work. Thank you. See you soon. Adios.
Adios.